Good evening everyone, welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 8th September 2025 and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So one by one we'll be discussing all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner, so that this analysis will be helpful for your exams. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's understand these topics one by one. And the first topic, so that has been covered in the Hindu newspaper, and this topic is talking about the Great Nicobar Mega Infrastructure Plan. And in fact, this editorial has been written by Congress leader Sonia Gandhi. So let's understand the context. The context is that recently the government of India has approved the Great Nicobar Mega Infrastructure Plan, and in fact it is believed that this Great Nicobar Mega Infrastructure project would have the environmental implications. So therefore a light has been shed on the Great Nicobar Mega Infrastructure Plan and its environmental and ecological impact on the Nicobar Island and also the tribal people who are living in the Nicobar Island. And in fact, in this editorial it has been said that India's policies decisions over a period of time, they have often been criticized for being hasty and ill-conceived. In fact, these policies are criticized for lack of proper planning and lack of taking into consideration the environmental concerns or the consequences. And in fact, one such project which has been widely criticized for its ill environmental impact is Great Nicobar Mega Infrastructure Plan. And in fact, the total estimated cost of Great Nicobar Mega Infrastructure Plan is 72,000 crore that the government has approved. And in fact, this venture in Great Nicobar promises not only to uproot the indigenous communities such as Shompans, who are the indigenous communities who are living in the Andaman and Nicobar group of islands, but also it is expected to devastate one of the planet's most unique ecosystems. However, it disregards the constitutional safeguards and it also undermines the environmental laws, and it exposes the region to the existential threats as well. Now, we all knew that Andaman and Nicobar Islands are known for rich flora and fauna. If such mega infrastructure project is executed, there is a high possibility of damage and degradation of the flora and fauna, and it also leads to degeneration of the biodiversity in the area. So therefore it will be having implications for both environment and also the tribal groups who are living in Andaman and Nicobar group of islands. So let's briefly understand the concerns surrounding the Nicobar project. So firstly, there are some indigenous tribal groups, and some of them are particularly vulnerable tribal groups. They are living in the Andaman and Nicobar group of islands, and it is believed that the Great Nicobar Infrastructure Development Plan would lead to the displacement of indigenous groups. It is being said that the Nicobaris and Shompans are the two important tribes and also vulnerable tribes who are living in the Nicobar group of project. And in fact, if we talk about the Nicobar, they have already In fact, they were already evacuated from their ancestral villages, and in fact, the particular project, the lands are selected in the Nicobaris areas. So therefore, it will lead to the alienation and exclusion of tribal groups such as Nicobaris. Shompan is also another particularly vulnerable tribal group. And in fact, it is believed that Shompan tribal group would face a greater existential threat because of the Great Nicobar Infrastructure Development Plan. And in fact, one thing that we should understand, the Shompan tribal groups are particularly vulnerable tribal groups. As of now, in India, there are 75 particularly vulnerable tribal groups who are living in 18 states and one union territory. Here, one union territory is Andaman and Nicobar group of islands. And in fact, the government has already denotified the parts of their reserve and destroyed forests central to their survival. Here we are talking about the Shompen tribe. The forest areas where Shompens have been living, the government has already denotified those reserves and destroyed the forests which are central to the survival and sustenance of the Shompen tribe, and therefore it has led to the way a large scale influx of the outsiders into the areas where these tribal people who are vulnerable living. And in fact, the Great Nicobar Infrastructure Development Plan is also a violation of the constitutional and statutory protections, because the project has bypassed the constitutional and statutory protections. If we talk about the constitutional protections, Article 338A of the Indian Constitution. So Article 338A of the Indian Constitution mandates constitution consultation with the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, but no such engagement has taken place. So therefore, this consultation with the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes is mandatory, because this particular project has been threatening the livelihoods and the lives and the sustenance of the Great Nicobarese tribe and also the Shompen tribe. But therefore, no consultation so far has been made in this regard. So therefore, it also amounts to bypassing constitutional and statutory protections. And in fact, this project also expected to lead to a large-scale ecological devastation as well. It is believed that this project will destroy around 15% of the Great Nicobar forest cover. And in fact, this will further add to the existing deforestation that has been taking place in Andaman and Nicobar group of islands. And in fact, in India we have the nationally determined contributions, which are also called as NDCs. So one of the NDC for India is creating an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion, right? So billion tons of carbon would be sequestered through creation of an additional forest cover of 2.5 to 3 billion. However, if deforestation continues to take place in such a large scale, so India will not be able to achieve these goals and objectives. However, the estimates of trees which are deforestation, because of the deforestation, the number of trees, so government estimates says that 8.5 lakh trees would be felled. However, the independent studies indicate that 32 to 58 lakh trees would be cut down to implement this project. And in fact, the government has also proposed compensatory afforestation. So what exactly is a compensatory afforestation? Now, in fact, imagine that there's an industry A, and this industry has been given forest land for its operations. So therefore, this industry would clear this forest land, cut down all the trees, and set up its manufacturing base or production base. So alternatively, this industry need to buy a certain amount of land and need to undertake large scale plantation or afforestation drive, and this is what is called as compensatory afforestation. However, the government has been diverting the land for the development of this large scale infrastructure project, and 15% of the forest cover would be destroyed. However, the government has proposed a solution. This solution is compensatory afforestation, but the compensatory afforestation in a far away place, not close to the area where trees are being cut down. So this compensatory afforestation will take place at a far away place, and is both ecologically meaningless and it is also absurd in nature. Now, why it is ecologically meaningless and absurd in nature? So let's understand this as well. So not only a climate is not compatible with Nicobar rainforest ecology at a place where this compensatory afforestation will take place, but a portion of the designated land has already been auctioned for a mining as well, right? So mining will also takes place. Along with that, the climate will not be suitable. A climate is not incompatible with the Nicobar's rainforest ecology. However, apart from deforestation, apart from cutting down the trees as part of this project, the port site itself overlaps with the turtle nesting zones and the coral reefs as well. Now understand, the turtle nesting sites and the coral reefs are very sensitive areas. If project continued without paying enough heed to these issues, then the coral reefs would die and the turtle nesting zones will also disappear. So therefore it might create a huge environmental havoc. So the environmental and ecological fragility of this area needs to be properly understood. And apart from that, there is a need for a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that has to be conducted before going ahead with this project. And Article 338 says that before executing such a project, which is going to have implications for the scheduled tribes who are living in that area, National Commission for the Scheduled Tribes need to be consulted beforehand. However, the biodiversity assessment that the government has done so far has flawed methods or used flawed methods, because turtle studies were conducted outside the nesting season, and drones are not suited for deep water observation, and they were deployed to assess the dugong habitats. So these dugong are the marine mammals, right? And in fact, these methodological issues, lapses, so they raise several questions about the scientific integrity and potential coercion of the research institutions as well. So let's understand the way forward very briefly. If we talk about the way forward, a call for conscience at its core, the Great Nicobar project represent the betrayal of both India's vulnerable communities, the Nicobaris and Shonbans. Shonbans are particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and its natural heritage as well. And apart from that, it displaces the Nicobaris tribal group and also the Shonbans. So in fact, it is being said that Article 338A, so it says that before executing such a project, so the government must consult with the National Commission for the Scheduled Tribes. So therefore it disregards the constitutional provisions, and it also ravages the ancient forests, threatens biodiversity, and places infrastructure in the disaster prone zone, because it is also a seismically active zone and it is very close to the Pacific Ring of Fire, and because of this reason it is being said that this is a disaster prone area. And apart from that, the development cannot come at the cost of justice, ecology, and human dignity. So these factors needs to be taken into consideration. However, the survival and the sustenance of the tribal groups, preservation of the existing fragile ecosystems, and the safety of future generations depend on raising our voices against this travesty of justice, right? So therefore, before taking up such a large scale project which is going to have a huge implications on the environment, biodiversity, flora, fauna, and the indigenous communities, it is very important that a comprehensive and a detailed assessment needs to be conducted, including the environmental impact assessment along with the impact or implications of such a project on the indigenous communities. So therefore, the social protection, cultural protection, and also the environmental safeguards need to be taken into account. So the next important topic is GST 2.0, and this article is very important article for the General Studies paper 3 GS 3, and in this article we are going to discuss the recent GST 2.0 reforms and how they will empower young Indians. So we all knew that India is a country with a huge demographic dividend. So we have a huge demographic dividend. That means we have a huge working age population. So working age population. So therefore, how GST reforms 2.0 is going to empower India's youth. So let's understand this as well. Now, if you talk about the GST reforms 2.0, so what has happened? So earlier there were multiple slabs, right? So GST as a taxation reform in the indirect taxation has been introduced in the year 2017. So earlier there were multiple slabs, around 5 slabs within the GST. However, recently the Union Finance Ministry has rationalized these 5 slabs, and these 5 slabs are brought down to just 2 slabs. So one is 5% of GST and 18% of GST, except 40% of GST on certain luxury items and same goods. So this is what is called as GST 2.0 reforms, right? So earlier there were multiple slabs including 28% of GST as well, but now there are only 2 major slabs, 5% and 18%, and most of the goods and services would be covered under the 5% and 18% of the slabs. And in fact, there is a substantial decline of GST on number of products, particularly the labor intensive sectors. So therefore, it is going to boost the production, it is going to improve the consumption, demand will be increased. So therefore, the economic growth must be driven by the domestic consumption, and that is the objective of launching GST 2.0 reforms. So I hope you have understood what exactly is GST 2.4 reforms. So let's understand the context of it. The context is that GST 2.4 is considered as a significant reform, and this reform aimed at simplifying the tax rates, easing burdens on essential, and also exempting the critical services such as insurance. And in fact, insurance has been exempted from the GST ambit. So therefore, it will help in the penetration of the insurance into the unconnected or the remote rural areas where people are not adequately linked with insurance. And apart from that, it will also lead to simplifying the existing tax structures, and it will also ease burdens on the essentials as well. However, this GST 2.4 reforms further seeks to strengthen household purchasing power, it will boost consumption, and it will also empower young professionals and entrepreneurs. So thereby, it will align India's fiscal policy with aspirations of its youthful population, driving economic momentum. Right? So as I have already told you, India is a country with a huge working age population or young population. So therefore, it will align with India's fiscal policy, aspirations of its youthful population, who are driving the economic momentum in the country. So let's understand the demographic dividend and youth aspirations. And as I've already told you, what exactly is a demographic dividend? It is a working age population. The number of working age population is called as the demographic dividend. And in fact, it is being said that nearly 2/3 of Indians, right, nearly 2/3 of Indians are below 35 years of age. So therefore, the youthful aspiration, since 2/3 of India's population is below 35 years of age, we can say that India's population, or India is the youngest country. And in fact, the young population is also one of the powerful driver of consumption. So therefore, we should focus on domestic consumption based economic growth, and it will not just give a push to the consumption, but also the entrepreneurship, and also the long-term national economic progress as well. So these are the major advantages of a country like India with a huge young population. And in fact, the demographic dividend, so if we talk about the demographic dividend, so it's not just about the numbers, right? It's not just about the numbers, rather it reflects the ambition of a globally connected generation. India is well connected with the rest of the world through globalization, right? So Indians, particularly the young Indians, are demanding opportunities, and they are also the drivers of the consumption and the economic growth, and in fact the social security systems and social safety systems as well. So we all knew that the government has brought in GST 2.0 reforms. As part of GST 2.0 reforms, the tax slabs have been rationalized. And in fact, this GST 2.0 reforms directly addresses the youth aspirations. So how it is going to address the youth aspirations? By lowering the financial barriers. So if there are financial barriers, those financial barriers will be further lowered, and it will boost the disposable incomes, and it will also promote access to the essentials and services which are crucial for the household security and safety, right? And in fact, young population, so they primarily invest or spend on education, healthcare, housing and digital products. So therefore, reduced taxes will directly empower them to pursue goals without any financial stress. So if they are investing in these different sectors, so that essentially means that the taxes have been reduced on these sectors. So therefore, they will have a more disposable income with them. So with the help of those disposable income with them, so they can pursue their goals without having any financial stress. And in fact, harnessing the youthful demand through tax reform would further ensure India avoids demographic stagnation. Now, what exactly is a demographic stagnation? So it means despite India having a demographic advantage, so not achieving a significant and substantial amount of growth is called as demographic stagnation, right? So instead, it channels its population strength into the economic resilience and also economic growth, and thereby ultimately promoting self-reliance or Atmanirbharta across different sectors, right, from agriculture up to the service sector, right? Now, apart from that, if we talk about the household consumption as a growth driver, now in fact, household consumption also plays a very important role, and it is also a key growth driver in India. So it is believed that the household consumption, the private household consumption, so it contributes around 60% of the India's overall GDP, which is huge, right? So the private consumption itself contributes to 60% of India's overall GDP, and which is a far higher than the other large economies. So therefore, establishing households as the single largest growth engine. So yes, everyone would agree with this fact that private household consumption alone contributing to 60% of India's GDP, which is higher than other large economies. So therefore, we can say that they are the single largest growth engine. They are the single largest growth engine, right? Apart from that, the savings from the tax burden, so they raise disposable income collectively across millions of households, right? For example, imagine that on a particular product, so on ACs, on televisions, on cars and other automobiles, taxes have been substantially reduced. So less taxation actually means that an individual would have a more disposable income, right? So they are going to have a more disposable income. So more disposable income so would collectively ensure that the demand for the goods and services would increase. Demand for the goods and services would further increase, and it will fuel the long-term growth cycle. It would further fuel the long-term growth cycle in an economy, because for example, imagine that you yourself have a more disposable income. So disposable income is a such income where you have the income and you can spend on other products as well. So when you have the liberty, when you have the freedom to spend the disposable income on number of other goods and services, then the demand for such goods and services would increase substantially. So therefore, it would fuel a long-term growth cycle in a country like India. However, there are families, middle class families, lower middle class families, which are juggling for EMIs, healthcare costs and education. So this GST 2.0 eases the monthly pressure that they have been facing. because now they have more disposable income. They're not going to pay higher taxes, so therefore it will ease their monthly pressure and freeing resources for better financial planning and also the aspirational consumption on the part of these people. For example, now they can utilize the disposable income on purchasing cars and other automobiles as well. However, as I've already told you that a tax has been exempted as part of GST 2.0 on life-saving drugs, 33 life-saving drugs, and exemption on healthcare and life insurance premiums. So this will further encourage the financial protection, right? So overall, it will transform the insurance into a necessity rather than a burden. So therefore, rising long-term security, potentially improving access to the diagnostic kits. So by linking the micro level affordability with micro level demand, GST 2.0 would further strengthen the household spending, sustaining India's position as one of the fastest growing global economies in the world. Right? So household consumption is a key driver or a major driver or a growth factor. Right? So in fact, it will also boost micro, small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurship as well. Right, so if we talk about the micro, small and medium enterprises, how they are going to benefit from this GST 2.0 reforms. So first of all, we have to understand the advantages or the benefits of MSMEs in India. So MSMEs employ over 10 million people and they also contribute significantly to India's GDP. Around 33% of India's GDP comes from MSMEs, and in fact it also employs around 10 million people, right? And MSMEs are also contributing to 30% of India's total exports. So therefore, they have a huge importance in the Indian economy. However, GST 2.0 reforms, so they reduces compliance complexities and they further encourages the small firms to formalize operations, enhancing their access to credit and mainstream supply chains. Now this is particularly beneficial and important for small businesses in various sectors, from auto parts to packaged food products, right? So therefore this covers number of areas within the MSMEs as well. And in fact, simplification as part of GST 2.0 reforms would further empower the young entrepreneurs. So these young entrepreneurs, they are offering confidence to innovate, expand and establish scalable businesses which are aligned with the India's growth trajectory. Apart from that, a formalization would further improve credit eligibility for MSMEs. The biggest problem that MSMEs have been facing so far, they have no access to the institutional credit. However, formalization of the MSMEs will further enhance, strengthen their access to the institutional credit. So therefore, it will address the long-standing barrier to the growth, particularly startups driven by youthful innovation and ambition in sectors like agricultural machinery and diagnostic kits. So stronger MSMEs would further expand employment opportunities and also provide a stable jobs for the youth. So thereby, it will reinforce a virtuous cycle of consumption-led demand and investment growth as well. Now, because of a higher consumption, demand for the goods and services would increase manifold. Now, increasing demand for the goods and services would further result in investment, because there is a huge demand domestically, and this demand will lead to the economic growth, and this will further leads to the private investment as well, right? So this is how GST 2.0 reforms are going to benefit India, particularly empowering youth through many ways, whether it is agriculture, micro, small and medium enterprises, manufacturing sector, industry or service sector, or even it is going to benefit the consumers as well. So this is in the backdrop of US imposing 50% tariffs on India's exports to US. So therefore, around it is being said that 18% of India's total exports to US, right? So therefore, in order to promote the domestic consumption-led growth, so these reforms have been brought in by the government. So the next important topic is India's urbanization. Now in fact, urbanization is a very important topic in general studies paper 2, and every year there are at least 1 or 2 questions on urbanization. So the problem with the urbanization is unplanned urbanization, unsustainable growth, and urban centers are increasingly vulnerable to the climate related stress and disasters. right? So floods, heat waves, so all these problems. So in this context, let's understand the urbanization in India. So what does unplanned urbanization actually means, and what are the best practices which are followed across the world about heat wave action plans or flood control, etc. And we'll also understand the way forward as well. So what is the context? So the context is that cities hold the key to India's future, because cities will generate around 70% of new jobs by 2030. So by 2030, cities alone will generate 70% of new jobs. By 2050 to 2070, India's urban population will touch almost 1 billion, right? So India's urban population will become almost 1 billion, with mega cities surpassing the size of the entire countries, right? So however, India has a narrow window to design infrastructure, housing, services, so they can sustain the growth while addressing the climate change vulnerability. So if you look at the urban centers, so we need to look at resilient infrastructure. So we need to develop resilient infrastructure. So housing is also very important to prevent the growth of slums in urban areas, and services need to be provided. For example, urban public transportation is a very important aspect, right? So therefore, the services, housing, infrastructure, along with addressing the climate change vulnerabilities of urban centers, is very important. Now let's understand the urban infrastructure needs in this context. So what are the specific needs of urban infrastructure? Now it is being said that by 2070, so India will require 144 million new homes, right? So by 2070, India will need 144 million new homes, more than double the existing stock, along with the transportation systems, municipal services that can cater to these unprecedented numbers. However, the new infrastructure will need to withstand the growing impacts of the climate change, because we all knew that how urban centers are increasingly become vulnerable to various climate change driven disasters, for example floods, heat waves, and all earthquakes, cyclones, landslides, right? So therefore, the urban centers have been facing all these problems, right? So the infrastructure, if we have developed such an infrastructure, the infrastructure must be resilient, and infrastructure must withstand the growing impacts of the climate change. So therefore, compact cities design, climate resilient housing, forward looking planning, so they are very, very important, right? So housing infrastructure should be climate resilient. So if we are planning for the urban development, so it should be futuristic and forward looking planning, and there should be a proper design and planning of the urban areas. So this is very important, right? So in fact, if we talk about the urban areas, so 25% of the urban roads are exposed to the flooding. So flooding is also a very major problem in India's urbanization story. So therefore, we need to deal with the urban floods as well. And in fact, in urban areas, even 10 to 12 or 20% road inundation, so that can actually disrupt over 50% of the city transportation systems. So therefore, flood risk mapping, drainage improvement, alternative routes, and road maintenance are essential and important to ensure mobility and productivity. So let's understand the climate change risks to the cities. So what are the risks that the climate change has been posing to cities? Now in fact, flooding, for example, more than a 2/3 of India's urban dwellers, so they have been vulnerable to the urban floods. So therefore, it leads to the losses of potentially 5 billion in future, 5 billion by 2030, and around 30 billion by 2070. So therefore, the losses because of the flooding will substantially increase in future. So if we talk about the solutions, there is a need for an integrated approach. So this integrated approach will consist of demarcating high risk areas as a no-build zones, improving citywide drainage, promoting nature-based solutions, so those solutions can absorb excess rainwater, and installing flood warning systems. So all these factors can help reduce this risk. So let's understand about some best practices. If we talk about best practices, Brazil. Now Brazil, which is now 80% of urban area, so has moved beyond the channelization and structural flood control towards this more integrated approach. And if we talk about India's best practices, Kolkata has adopted city level flood forecasting and warning system, and Chennai is improving the stormwater management and flood preparedness to support the most vulnerable populations. So these are the best practices that are followed in other parts of the world and also in India as well, so to make people less vulnerable to the extreme events of the climate change and to build climate resilient infrastructure. So secondly, extreme heat. Now in fact, because of the urban heat island effect, now urban areas are known as concrete jungles, right? So concrete jungles because they are concrete everywhere and they also easily absorb the solar radiation, right? So therefore the urban heat island effect, so this is causing the nighttime temperatures to increase in major Indian cities to by around 3 degrees Celsius to 5 degrees Celsius year round. So therefore the urban heat island effect overall has been substantially increasing temperatures in the urban areas. So however, if we talk about the measure that have to be followed, so with the temperature expected to rise throughout the 21st century, cities can actually build on Ahmedabad's heat action plan. Now in Ahmedabad, so a proper heat action plan has been adopted, and it consists of increasing tree cover and canopies, replacing the heat incentivizing roofs with easily doable cool roofs, and shifting the working hours for outdoor laborers, right? So for example, if there are outdoor laborers and if they are working outside, so the working hours may be changed, right? So the roofs may be changed, and increasing tree cover and canopies is also another very important aspect that has to be kept in mind. So let's understand the benefits of it. Scaling up these measures will further prevent hundreds of thousands of deaths, sustain economic productivity in India. So what should be the way forward in this context? So if we talk about the way forward, so design a future housing as part of compact climate resilient urban plans, right? So always focus on climate resilient infrastructure, climate resilient housing, and also the climate resilient urban planning, and even focus on demarcating high risk areas as no build zones with clear urban planning guidelines. So scale up successful models like Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan and Kolkata flood forecasting systems. There is a need to promote the public-private partnership for investment and innovation, which also plays a very important role. Similarly, there is a need to implement nature-based solutions such as wetlands, permeable pavements, lakes to further manage the pluvial flooding in the urban centers. And apart from that, awareness also plays a very important role. So therefore there is a need to launch a nation level awareness campaigns to build a culture of resilient urban living in those urban centers. And in fact, there is a need to develop strategies, financial protection of urban residents against the climate related risks, including improved insurance penetration as well. With the reduction of GST on insurance or exemption of insurance sector from GST ambit, so there is a scope for further penetration of the climate change related insurance as well. So all these measures have to be undertaken in order to make the urban planning more and more resilient, sustainable. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.